pioneer farmers first arrived in Ventura County, the men planted the crops that were familiar to them. Then gradually they began experimenting with lima beans, sugar beets, walnuts, apricots, and with irrigation, citrus. But we owe Southern California's flower, seed, and bulb industry to the vision and determination of a woman. Woo! Theodosia Burr Shepherd. The Shepherd family arrived in San Buenaventura in 1873. And by 1900, Theodosia was the most famous woman in California. The Smithsonian Institution declared that it was she who put Ventura County on the map. Today, from the year 1915, we are honored to have with us the daughter of the remarkable woman. Myrtle Shepherd Francis grew up in what was to become the famous Shepherd's Gardens between Main and Poli Streets, a block east of the county's elegant new courthouse. Mrs. Francis had continued the work of Theodosia B. Shepherd Seed Company through an international catalog published from 1889 to the current issue of 1915. It is my pleasure to introduce a gifted floriculturalist in her own right, Mrs. Myrtle Shepherd Francis, who will share her memories of Theodosia Burr Shepherd, Ventura County's first and greatest gardener. Woo!
Well, I appreciate your interest in the work of my mother, Theodosia Burr Shepherd. I think she would be quite surprised at the fuss people have made over her since her passing 10 years ago. Mother was always so involved with whatever she was doing at the moment. She was never concerned with that other people thought. So, to get started, and well, first, just to say that I am not the public speaker that my mother was. So please, bear with me, and excuse my need for these notes to keep me on track. Anyway, well then, my mother, Theodosia Burr Hall, was born in Iowa, destined to be a small town school teacher, but Papa, William Edgar Shepherd, returned from the Civil War, swept her off her feet, and encouraged her to become an emancipated woman. So, we came to California in 1873. My brother Augustus and I in tow, 10 days on a train to Sacramento, then a stern wheeler to San Francisco, and finally a steamship to Santa Barbara. Only then did Papa realize that we could not afford Santa Barbara. So we took to shipping again to San Buenaventura, where living was cheaper. And their fledgling newspaper was on sale. While Papa was no journalist, he had plenty of opinions. After Iowa, our first sight of Main Street, Ventura was quite a shock. Card sharks hung around the saloon doors. Barefoot Indians and Chinese coolies moved silently about their business. Mexican cowboys sauntered, spurs jingling, and a solemn black-robed priest inspected us from the broad mission steps. None of them looked like anyone we'd ever seen in Iowa. Well, so Papa found a house for us across from the plaza. It wasn't a park then, just a dusty square, no trees, because Mother hadn't transformed the town just yet. Recruiting church ladies visited, but Mother told them we were free thinkers. Thank you anyway. She never gave a thought to fitting in. She was more interested in her wonderful new garden and what she could plant here in sunny California. even though she was pregnant with my sister Margaret, who arrived on San Miguel Day, September 19th, 1873. The men started the celebrations by firing their guns that morning, and later they roped off a spot near the mission for a bullfight. The following spring of 1874, the wharf was finished, and freighters began arriving. The town trustees planned to build a courthouse, a brick schoolhouse, and a ditch through town with water by the bucketful, just for the dipping. Ever the optimist, Papa bought our big house up Chestnut Street, one of 2 houses in town with a bathroom. Gussie was always bringing the other little boys to see. Mother was always in poor health and expecting another baby, but she had to have a garden, and she started the big one up the hill. In 1877, I turned 9, and that was the year of the big drought. The air was filled with the smell of dead animals. Buzzards wheeled overhead or perched on trees and fences, waiting. Nobody had any money. Mother's China boy was let go, and I had to leave school to help at home. And if that weren't enough, Papa's editorials made enemies. Men wore sidearms, but in our case, the Republicans just started a competing newspaper, and soon we were bankrupt. So with that, we moved to San Francisco, but San Buenaventura was always home to us, so we came back, and Papa opened a law practice. We moved our few belongings back into our house, grateful now that we hadn't been able to sell it. It was shabby and empty, but we were home again. With no money for repairs, we collected leaves and flowers, and Mother glued them to the walls with melted wax, covering the stains and water spots with beautiful natural patchworks. We decorated boxes and filled them with flowers and plants, and with all of our colorful bits and pieces, it was like living in a cozy bird's nest. The neighbor ladies made excuses to come in and see. So, Nellie Newby said right out, "Theodosia is different than the rest of us. Her courage makes me forget the sadness and drudgery of my own life." After 4 years of scraping by, Mother found her solution to our financial troubles in a children's magazine. She advertised California seashells and flower seeds in trade for ribbons and laces, or even for money. Before long, we were spending our days treasure hunting to fill the orders, and people mostly sent us cash. Mother's health improved, and her mind buzzed with ideas. For Papa, the pocket money meant he could visit social clubs, the saloons, and take on his favorite clients, underdogs like the Spanish and Chinese who might only be able to pay in hay or fruit. He and Senora del Valle Guerra became good friends, and our family was welcomed into the inner circle of Spanish society. Gussie and I liked having friends on both sides of town. By 1883, Mother was deep with more orders than she could supply. Peter Henderson, the famous Eastern flower man, sent her a big package of his seeds and a note that said, "I am certain California will be the greatest seed and bulb growing country of the world. I advise you to go into business at once." This to a woman. With no training, delicate health, a boundless enthusiasm, remarkable confidence, but children clinging to her skirts and poverty knocking at her door. But she and Papa, they borrowed $1,000 and bought 2 whole acres, from Main Street to Poli, and from Chestnut to Fir. No, from Fir to Chestnut. Anyway, we had no money for water pipes or a greenhouse, so Mother used a piano shipping crate for cuttings, and thus began California's great bulb and flower seed industry. New firms sent orders, and she searched the county for bulbs, coming back some evenings with the spring wagon piled high. But no one was keeping track of the money. There was a great deal coming in, but there was also a great deal going out because Mother had started developing her gardens. That's right, she bought rare palms in that glorious night blooming series by the front porch. Folks from all over town still gather in the evening to watch the blossoms open up. By 1884, water was piped in, and Mother built a conservatory adjoining the dining room so we could enjoy the view through the window at mealtimes. Well, you know, it wouldn't be California without droughts and floods, right? Well, 1884 was a flood year. Water underran the greenhouse, and mud piled against the door, so for weeks, the only way in and out of the house was to gather up our skirts and climb through the dining room window. Folks gave my mother seeds to experiment with, like cosmos. They were small and drab before Mother started with them, but Mother always said, in the field of your imagination are all possible flowers. She developed cosmos into a spectacular strain, from small drab flowers into tall billowing plants with brilliant palm-sized blossoms, a block of them. 400 square foot grew on Chestnut Street, right in the heart of San Buenaventura. With all of Mother's care and attention dedicated to the flowers, well, her business accounts were never up to date, and bills and notes were scattered everywhere. She was famous now in flower-growing circles, and magazines hounded her for articles. She liked to write at the dining room table, so she and Papa ate in the kitchen, and we children took to eating our meals in the giant pepper tree in the backyard. She never knew what time it was. She might start a batch of molasses taffy in the middle of the night as a treat for us, then the next day forget to cook dinner. And her health was a constant problem until she began studying the power of the mind over the body with a Christian Science practitioner. Her health improved quickly, so they used our parlor for lectures and the treatment of patients. Soon after this, Mother went alone to a dentist, walked right down the street, had 11 teeth extracted without an anesthetic, then walked back home. 11 teeth, no anesthetic, and walked home. On the heels of this spiritual awakening, we suffered a plague of near biblical proportions. The conservatory window into the dining room, well, it attracted an invading army of tiny green and brown tree frogs. They would squish underfoot or plop into your lap or your hair. We tried to ignore them, but guests sometimes required smelling salts. In 1887, the railroad finally reached Ventura County. Real estate prices soared, and brick blocks replaced the shacks on Main Street. Mr. Burpee made us part of his annual tour, and special excursion trains came just to see the now famous Shepherd's Gardens. Business grew so rapidly we couldn't fill the orders. Mother began leasing lots around town and put some orders out to ranchers on shares. She bought a carriage so she could supervise the planting and harvesting, and she kept a sharp eye out for the slightest differences, singling out the largest among hundreds of flowers from many feet away. Mother had a passion for begonias, and we spent endless hours in the painstaking process of selection. Special lath houses were built, and when her newest begonias bloomed, Mother wept with delight. And soon we had created 20 new varieties and a climber that became the largest begonia bush in the world, 15 foot high, 50 foot across and still growing. In 1889, Mother said it was time for the Theodosia B. Shepherd Company to print its first seed catalog. Without a thought of competition, she pressed women in her floral society to grow for the trade, emancipated from the drudgery of housework. At the State Fruit Growers Association, she urged women, come out into the open air, careless of tan, freckles, or unconventional clothing. Listen to nature's teachings and become wise. My mother and Luther Burbank, they discussed the influence of the human mind on plants. And in one letter she wrote, in the love of flowers, it is as if the soul of the plant comes in touch with our soul. If the plant possesses the power to arouse such strong vibrations in us, is it possible the vibrations from us are received by the flower? We and the plant are manifestations of the same force. All the women's causes, as you can imagine, appealed to my mother. And the postmaster had to keep a special bin for all of her mail. She entertained Susan B. Anthony, Anna Shaw, Carrie Chapman Catt, and other champions of the women's causes, as well as writers, artists, horticulturists, mental healers, food faddists, and some just plain odd characters. Julia Ward Howe lectured in Ventura at Mother's invitation, arguing women's suffrage could recreate the world. And while she waited for that to happen, Mother kept up her fight against the tyranny of women's clothing. Although the local ladies all insisted they would fall into a heap without their corsets. She was just so different from everyone else. Especially when she took up something new, like wearing barefoot sandals. Papa called them her scandals. Frankly, Mother could be a great embarrassment. But we were all very proud when she was invited to speak at the 1894 Women's Congress in San Francisco. She was oblivious to the fact that she was the most famous woman in the state of California. Newspapers called her the Flower Wizard of California. After her speech, someone in the crowd suggested she stand on a table so all could see her. Without a second thought, she did, turning slowly to show off her new silk dress and her lace mantilla. An interviewer wrote, she is equally at home in literature and art, and alive to every question of the hour. She ought to give up garden seed raising and teach people how to think and live. Speaking trips took up more and more of her time, and it often required the services of the entire family to get her ready to go. Once she forgot her speech, and they held up the train while I dashed back home to get it. Her catalog was international now. Her plant nursery was the only one of its kind in the West, and the gardens were listed as one of the show places of Southern California. But Mother was too wrapped up in her work to notice. 1902 was the year of the poinsettias. No swell society function was complete without them. No bride fully dressed without a poinsettia and her corsage. The new Potter Hotel in Santa Barbara ordered 10,000 double red geraniums and 20,000 verbenas, and I know for a fact we were the only nursery in California that could have filled that order. Folks had no idea of the magnitude of what my mother was doing. Her dream of California as a vast flower garden was coming true, but with it came competition. And with the cost of maintaining the garden, supporting Mother's causes and Father's underdogs, we were about to go under once again. But Mother just went on expecting the best. And once again, something wonderful was right around the corner, and this time, literally. You see, years ago, Mother had bought Mr. Burbank's ever-bearing crimson winter rhubarb for our kitchen garden. Now we had rhubarb everywhere. So she advertised, made taste tests, wrote articles, and gave speeches on the wonderful new vegetable fruit. We planted rhubarb in vacant lots all over town, and before long we were sending off thousands of pounds of rhubarb with orders for all we could grow. She created a demand only she and Mr. Burbank could supply. My husband, Willard, Francis, and I live in a bungalow on Poli Street adjoining the garden, and we gradually took over management. Visiting reporters marveled at Mother's willpower and spiritual qualities. She may not have been a business, she was a recognized genius in the realm of the imagination. On September 6, 1906, Theodosia Shepherd passed away quietly at home. The townspeople who had so often ridiculed her idiosyncrasies now acknowledged her contributions, and the whole county mourned her loss. We have maintained the gardens just as she wished, and one feels her presence in every tree and flower. It's been almost 10 years since her passing, but her influence remains throughout Ventura County. Ride through miles of bean fields and suddenly you find an acre of flowers in riotous color and sweet perfume grown for the Theodosia B. Shepherd Seed Company. And every woman's garden has some sort of floral experiment going on. Shades of sweet peas and nasturtiums existing nowhere else in the world. In Ventura County, the making of new flower varieties is as common as new cake recipes in other places. Our catalog for 1915 has just come out, and my newest petunia, an ethereal pink and white, was pronounced the petunia of the century. I call it Theodosia in memory of Mother, for her name means gift of God. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Myrtle Shepherd Francis, for joining us this evening and sharing with us your memories of Miss Theodosia Burr Shepherd. I'm sorry we don't have time for questions just now, but perhaps later. In the meantime, I'd like to introduce you to Gywndolyn Valley, daughter of celebrated local historian Suzanne Paquette Lawrence. Suzanne developed this living history performance in a Ventura College creative writing class led by her daughter. Is that for you? Each semester, Suzanne would do a living, oh, sorry, I already said that, didn't I? No. I'll start over, wherever I am, sorry. Each semester, Suzanne would do a living history performance at Ventura College, followed by a question and answer conducted by Gywndolyn, who would suss out the writing and research process, as well as discuss hot-button language. For example, when Myrtle says they have to let their China boy go, Suzanne could then discuss how the Chinese in Ventura had their neighborhood and businesses burned down. When Suzanne passed away unexpectedly in 2010 at 72 years old, Gywndolyn donned her mother's wigs, hats, and costumes to perform this script several times for audiences at Ventura College and at the site of Shepherd's Gardens in downtown Ventura. But the story goes deeper. Suzanne's grandmother, Anna Paquette worked with Theodosia and Myrtle at Shepherd's Gardens, developed her own strains of begonias and Cecil Bruner roses, and she wrote for the LA Times about creating a coastal kitchen garden. Suzanne's father grew up in the gardens catching rabbits for them to eat, and house finches, which he sold to pet stores as Hollywood finches. Just as Theodosia's daughter carried on her mother's tradition in the garden, Gywndolyn continues to help fulfill her family's legacy in Ventura.
So, but if you do have any questions, I can try to answer them. My mom was much better at answering them than me. Steve, do you say anything in closing here at this point?
Yeah, I was just waiting for you to walk off the stage.
Okay.